we should enact an effective competition law. There is one that is coursing its way through Congress, and there are those that are nervous that Congress, being the way it is, a law might come up protecting the interests of those that are already in a non-competitive, comfortable position. If we consider that what we are aspiring for is a democratic business environment, then we must understand that a democratic business environment's essence is competition. Without that competitive environment and level playing field, then you end up with oligopolies. You end up with a structure of society that will always feature an increasing gap between the very rich, and even bigger between the rich and the poor, and so forth and so on. Yes, there may be progress even along those types of social structures, but that would not be inclusive, it would not be just, and it would not be in keeping with the dreams of most of our Filipino citizens. So I urge you all to keep your eye on the debates on the competitive law, bring in your inputs, lobby if you must, but make sure that we come up with a proper one so that once again we can signal to the world that the level playing field is on its way. Seventh, let us be prepared adequately and early for regional and global reconfigurations that will soon affect our economy. I am talking about, in particular, the ASEAN Economic Community and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It is imperative that we be prepared for this important global game changers. Why? Because we have a tendency to wait till the last minute and then scramble furiously to try to see where we can still position ourselves, while others are much more prepared. And so at the end of all that scrambling, we end up in our community of nations with a Tagalog term, saling pusa. Now, do we want to be saling pusa? I'm sure we'll breastbeat and say, of course not. But if we don't prepare, and the others are preparing, if we don't take a clear idea of what our competitive advantages are, then the only competitive advantage we're going to have in an AEC is our ability to export more Filipinos to the rest of the countries around us. That should not be the case. But this is looming. It's coming in 2015. I would suggest that with respect to both the AEC and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that we don't find ourselves coming to an APEC leaders meeting still half-baked about what step we ought to make in order to be a strong participant of both global trade configurations. This time, if we are prepared, then we would be able to take advantage of that configurations, because to my mind, these would be welcome developments, for they will compel us to do the right things. Many of our failures in the past had traced to our inability to undertake meaningful and fundamental reforms that build inherent competitiveness. Now, perhaps, if we prepare well, we would be able to move our economy from the need to adhere to our commitments with other nations, and as well as to ensure our competitive position. Let us therefore make sure that we are ready. And as we position ourselves for those, let us become more aware of their value to us, because all these reforms that we wish to undertake now should manage to create the quality jobs that we are looking for, and that is the basic theme of our meeting today. There are many initiatives in the private sector taking place even in the next few weeks, which will give you the opportunity to sit and listen to those who are going to discuss the innards and the details of the AEC as well as the TPP. Don't leave yourselves clueless. If the government is a little bit slower in trying to disseminate information about these, then take it from the private sector. This week, or was it last week, FINEX had a symposium on AEC. MAP will be conducting one. The Asian Institute of Management has a series on it come June. But the private sector has now to take the slack that seems to be there from the public sector side. I am confident that eventually the public sector side will catch up. But as I said, time is of the essence. 2015 is just around the corner. We need to have a precise identification of our niches now. So let me conclude with a final challenge. We are proud of everything that has taken place in growth and so forth, and we would want to be able to use this as a platform for making sure that reforms are institutionalized, because that is the way we create the middle class, by creating jobs. But we have to walk our talk. We have the habit of having good talks, but not good walks. We have 3 arrancadas in a row. And I would be really depressed if we come to the next arrancada speaking about the same things and wondering where has all the time gone. We have faith that this administration that has set on the right foot against corruption, that has produced impressive growth rates, has the excellent chance of pulling this off and being able to instill one more institutional reform that should be in our mindsets. And that is our ability to walk the talk. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and congratulations on what I'm sure is going to be a very productive conference. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, former Finance Secretary de Ocampo. And now to introduce our next speaker, may we call back on stage Mr. John Forbes.
Before I introduce Bill Luz, I want to say something to Sir Bobby, and I was about to call him Your Highness, but I won't do that. I counted 3 or 4 times when you could hear a pin drop in this room. And what he said, which was very profound, really needs to be listened to and broadcast as much as possible by the middle class so that we increase our numbers. And Sir Bobby, what you said inspired us. I'm not sure you can exceed it next year, but it guaranteed that you will be invited back. And I'd like everyone to give a big round of applause to Bobby de Ocampo. It's difficult to have a fine speaker succeed a fine speaker, but I think we do in the person of Guillermo Luz. And anyone who's been in this town for a long time knows about Bill's contributions. But let me recall that he took the Makati Business Club as executive director from, I believe, I'm not sure the year, 86 or before EDSA, but a period of about 15 years, and simultaneously was executive director of NAMFREL, which safeguarded not only the 1986 SNAP election, but subsequent elections as well. Bill has gone on from that to work with as COO of the Ayala Foundation and running the museum across the street for several years, and then has stepped up to, amazingly, 3 challenges at the present time. I don't know anybody who takes on so much. So in 2010, he was asked to be the private sector co-chair of the National Competitiveness Council, and he'll talk about those results here shortly. But he also has been asked, I'm not sure of the exact position, but it's the National Disaster Recovery Foundation that has been set up from the private sector to deal with the continuous natural disasters that the country has faced for a long time. And thirdly, with the APEC summit coming in November of 2015, Bill is also deeply involved in coordinating not just the summit, but the 12 months of meetings prior to that. So, and he's a lover of jazz and many other things. Let me invite Guillermo Luz to the podium to talk about how he and his colleagues and the government intend to raise competitiveness up to the top third in the country.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for the kind introduction. Former President Ramos, Secretary of Labor Baldos, PEZA Director General Lilia de Lima, Sir Bobby, of course, members of the board of the Joint Foreign Chambers, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to speak here again at Arrancada. It's my 3rd year in a row to speak at Arrancada, and also my luck to follow Bobby de Ocampo 3 times in a row, I believe, no? And if you recall, one of the symbols, I guess, just Bobby talked about is how to look calm as a duck floating on water, but below the waterline paddling like crazy to keep moving. And this is a little what we are like still as we head into the end game. And so what I'd like to do is give a presentation on the state of competitiveness of the country to all of you. And I thank you for the opportunity for giving me time to give you this update on what we do at the NCC. Okay. Well, just to be clear, what are we competing for exactly? We're competing for investments. We are competing for trade, physical goods. We're competing for trade in terms of services, service exports. We're competing for people, tourists. We're competing for our own people, OFWs who are leaving the country. We're competing for them as well. And we are competing for reputation, branding. That's what we are competing for. No? Now, I'm happy that Bobby did mention about the inclusive targets, because ultimately what we are really working for is not a number, not a ranking, not a rating. We're really competing for all this, and we need to quantify it. We're competing for GDP growth, for investments, for exports, but ultimately we're competing for poverty reduction and for increasing the size of the middle class. And currently the middle class, which I agree 100% with Bobby, is really the stabilizing force in an economy, not only economically, but socially and politically as well. This is a very small middle class, only 8%, because actually most of our middle class, I believe, if you want to call them the OFWs, are abroad. we do not have many of them here. So ultimately, this is what we are fighting for. So today I'd like to just kind of walk through what has happened. Where have we succeeded? Where have we fallen behind? How do we move forward? And I think now we need to really address the question, how do we keep this all in place and set up a culture of competitiveness moving forward? So this is where we are today. And I know that some of the charts are in your packet. Some of the indices you have in your information booklet are a little different from what we have. But what we have here are the major competitiveness indicators or indices that we are tracking at NCC. And of these, I'm happy to report that we are up on most of them and just holding steady, dropping marginally on a few. But we are generally up on pretty well all the major ones we have had. So maybe if we were compared to the credit ratings upgrades in terms of competitiveness rankings, we've gotten about 8 upgrades in the last year. Over a 3-year period, we are up in a significant way across all the majors. Maybe IMD just marginally, and the Global IT Report, which is an area of concern for us because this is the so-called Network Readiness Report. We have been flat, but all others we have moved up fairly significantly, and the key is how to keep this pace going. If we are to compare ourselves against the rest of ASEAN, we've moved up into the sort of approaching the middle of the pack, and when we were towards the bottom at one time, having been overtaken by Vietnam several years ago, and then us re-overtaking Vietnam and trying to close the gap to the others. So we've taken the big increases. We're up 26 over the last 3 years, and we need to keep this sort of a pace as we progress to the next 3 years if we want to get to the top 1/3 or the top 20% of the world. And make no mistake about it, we live in a very competitive region, ASEAN, where most of our neighbors are already up there in the top 20% of the world. So where have we succeeded? What has worked? Well, if you take a look at the World Economic Forum, you'll see that we've gained on most of the indicators. There are 12 broad categories, and it amounts to 114 different indicators. So we're up on most. And this is a good thing because in the past, we were typically dropping on majority of the 12. Today, if you take a look at the last year and over the 3 years, we've gained on almost all, and we have dropped a little bit on the education and primary health. And even at that particular indicator, there's a problem with the data pickup from international education agencies, UNESCO, which is posting dated or old data, which WF is picking up. So we're not getting a true reflection. But education is an area of concern for us. But the trend is good. And if you take a look where we were in terms of centiles, once upon a time in '94, we were in the bottom 20% of the world, bottom 20% of the world. We've moved up above the median, above the 50%, but our target, of course, is to continue moving up. We need to get into the top third, I think, to be taken, seriously. So let me illustrate one of the things we've done, because this is one of our key problems in the country, that of a bureaucracy, red tape, a lot of friction, cost, and we just make people jump through hoops to get anything done in the country. So let me illustrate what needed to be done in this one regard. Last year, we put up Game Plan 1.0 to go through the Ease of Doing Business report of IFC. And here you can see we were again in the bottom third for many years, and we began to move up as a result of Game Plan 1.0. And there's some, I think, valuable lessons to be learned from here, and I think something that we need to repeat and, in fact, improve on. So the first thing we see for the Philippines is that for ease of doing business, IFC tracks 10 major business transactions that you all have to go through, we all have to go through in the life cycle of a business, from opening it to shutting down the business. And we've done miserably in this indicator. We were 138 out of 180 plus, so we were well down there in the list. And you can see now that we've begun to turn around, at least for some of the procedures. We have made gains, though we are still lagging, quite critically lagging, I think, in the area of even starting a business, as basic as that. Imagine ranking 170th in the world out of 189. There's not much room more to drop in this particular indicator, so we are determined to fix this one. But you can see at least we've begun to make gains on the others. So I lose sleep over the first one, especially. If we were to compare to the rest of ASEAN, again, we moved towards the middle of the pack. We used to be at the bottom. We took the largest increase last year, jumping 30 countries, versus minor changes except for Brunei in ASEAN. But you can see that we still have quite a ways to go to close this gap. But the change was the best in the world for last year. So the game plan works because there's a lot of teamwork involved between public sector and private sector, and between multiple agencies. My staff is under a bit of pressure because they have to beat their standard of plus 30 this year. So you can imagine how all those ducks are working to keep paddling like crazy to hit the plus 30 this year. So I wanted to just illustrate this because to show that this is not impossible, it is doable. And we were able to get this done in 1 year between July 2012 and completed the work by June 2013 and received the results in October 2013. So I am optimistic, and I'm convinced that when the government decides it wants to get something done, and it has the cooperation of the private sector, and all agencies are committed, something can get done. The trick is, how do we repeat this type of success across so many other projects? And there are many other projects in government, and many other good examples in government, but we have to just spread this type of practice much, much wider. What we did, for instance, is we just took a look at the processes, just as an example, of starting a business, and we found, of course, that we run people through 16 steps through different agencies just to actually incorporate a new company. I understand for foreign companies it's even a little longer, so that's something that we should simplify. Our model for simplification actually is PEZA, which gets everything done rather quickly. So our challenge is always how to take PEZA and make it domestic in terms of its practice, because it does such a good job with the foreign companies. So we tried to determine which ones we can simplify and cut red tape. And so we're in the process of trying to cut and combine by combining steps or eliminating steps. And when we eliminate steps, we should effectively shorten these steps. So we've taken it down from 16 and trimmed it down to about 10 or 11. Our target is to take this down to about 3. Now 3 requires automation and a lot of smart process design to get this thing done. But I told the government 16 to 10 is not good enough. 16 to 3 is more the standard, which is what other countries are doing. It's between 1 and 3. Not 4, not 5, not 6. It's between 1 and 3. We need to be at that number to be world class. So, following the success of Game Plan 1.0, we have designed Game Plan 2.0. So I will just walk you through what the process is like and just imagine how it goes across all the steps we look at. The first one is starting a business. What we do is we benchmark. All those numbers represent the rank of each country for each step. So from here, we simply track which countries are beating us and which countries are moving up or down in the global rank. And then we target a country that we want to study and analyze what they're doing, benchmark against that country, and see what we can do to match performance of that country to move up to that level. So we look at these numbers very closely, and this is the starting a business. If you look at Malaysia, which is ranked number 2 in ASEAN, and I think number 6 in the world, New Zealand would be number 1, and Singapore would be something like number 3. So many of Asian countries, New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, would be, those 5 would be probably 5 of the top 6 or 7 in the world in starting a business. We're 170, okay? So you can imagine what we need to do to move up to this number. So we track exactly what we need to do to save on space, on steps and time, and get to this number that we want. So by making the changes, eliminating steps and days, and targeting which agencies have to do this job, and it is a multi-agency job, then we will see what results we will eventually get, the impact on the starting a business indicator and the impact on the overall country indicator. So we've done the same for paying taxes, because here you might be paying your taxes online for BIR, but many companies are still paying SSS, PhilHealth, Pag-ibig manually, so that still slows things down. So as we get a little more automation and streamlining and portals, then we will be able to eliminate a lot of the steps and the time. So again, we've taken a look at who's out there. In this case, we've done the simulation, and we'll see what impact we will have. And we have to work with, well, Pag-ibig, PhilHealth, SSS, and BIR. SSS has completed a job, so it's really down to these 3 agencies. Plus, I must say, the LGUs. An LGU still makes you go through 4 different types of processes. I told them they have to combine it into a single form and a single process. There's no sense in making us go through 4 steps or 4 different transactions when we can combine the 4 transactions in a single, into a single transaction. So from that, we've created the scenarios in Game Plan 2.0, low-hanging fruit, big impact indicators, and the stretch targets. So we know by getting a combination of the 10 indicators and the performance, we have studied kind of what impact we would get on the country in terms of the competitiveness rankings under ease of doing business, and what we would do to close the gap to in ASEAN. So if we take a look at the low-hanging fruit scenario, we would have to complete our unfinished business of 2013, because we did not hit all our targets. In spite of the fact that we made a 30-country jump, we would have made a bigger jump had we met all the targets. So just completing those targets, we would make another big jump, roughly 69. Now, it's a planning exercise, so the numbers are not so exact, because this assumes that the other countries, we have to hold the other countries steady in the ranking. We're only studying the Philippines, but it does tell us directionally kind of large jumps we need to make. So this is the low-hanging fruit scenario. If the impact would take us up to number 4, almost at the border of where I want to be, but I want to be in the top 3. I think for the country, we need to be in the top 3 within ASEAN, not number 4. If we take a look at the big impact scenario, we identified 4 very important indicators: starting a business, registering property, getting credit, and protecting investors. If we achieve those targets, we could move up by 79, just tackling those 4. And the effect on our ASEAN ranking would still just take us up still to number 4, so just below where we want to be. And if we go for stretch targets, which means you have to hit all the targets on all 10. You notice I'm not going to say we're going to do that in 2015, because this is a difficult job, and probably we'll have to go multi-year on this one. But if we do it, we can